The Midnight Broadcast. Jenny Carter had always been a night owl, but lately her sleeplessness had turned into full-blown insomnia. The empty hours stretched endlessly in her small apartment, a claustrophobic space filled with second-hand furniture and the faint hum of the city beyond her window. She tried everything to sleep: warm milk, meditation apps, even that lavender spray her coworker swore by. Nothing worked. It was during one of those restless nights at 3:13 a.m. that she stumbled upon the radio station. She wasn't even sure why she turned on the old clock radio she'd inherited from her grandmother. It sat neglected on her bedside table, a relic of a pre-digital age. But in her desperation, she twisted the dial, and the static dissolved to a voice. "Welcome to the Midnight Broadcast," a man said, his voice smooth, hypnotic. "For those who can't sleep, for those who'd rather not." Jenny froze. The voice was deep and calming, yet there was something unnervingly intimate about it, like he was speaking directly to her. "If you're listening, it's because you're meant to. Stay with us. Tonight's story is just for you." Her pulse quickened. She looked around the room, half expecting to find someone watching her. But she was alone. She shook her head, laughing nervously at her own paranoia, and settled back against the pillows. The man began to speak, weaving a tale about a woman trapped in a house with no doors, only mirrors. As he described the woman's mounting terror, Jenny's heart raced in time with the story. She could see it all so clearly, as though the events were unfolding in her own mind. When the story ended, she realized her palms were slick with sweat. "We'll be back tomorrow night," the man said, his voice a soothing promise. "Same time, same frequency, sweet dreams." The static returned, and Jenny stared at the radio, her heart still pounding. She didn't sleep that night. The next evening, Jenny found herself counting down the hours until 3:13 a.m. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about the midnight broadcast. Something about it had gripped her, made her feel seen. When the time came, she turned the dial, and there it was. "Welcome back," the voice said, as if greeting an old friend. "Tonight's story is for the seekers of truth, for those who know there's more to this world than what we see." The story was about a man who discovered a secret room in his house, a room that didn't exist on the blueprints. Inside, he found a diary written in his own handwriting, chronicling events that hadn't happened yet. As the man's life began to mirror the diary's entries, he realized he couldn't escape the fate it described. When the broadcast ended, Jenny felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. She glanced at her own reflection in the window, her pale face framed by the city lights. For a moment, she thought she saw someone standing behind her. She spun around, but the apartment was empty. Night after night, Jenny tuned in. Each broadcast seemed tailored to her fears and doubts. A story about a woman losing her grip on reality. A tale of a man haunted by regrets he couldn't change. It was as if the voice knew her deepest secrets, her darkest thoughts. And then the broadcast began to give her instructions. "Jenny," the voice said one night, startling her. He'd never used her name before. "Are you ready to play?" She froze, her hand hovering over the radio. "What?" she whispered. "You've been listening so faithfully, it's time for you to join the story." Her breath hitched. "I don't understand." "You will," the voice replied. "Go to your kitchen." She hesitated. Her rational mind screamed at her to turn off the radio, to throw it out the window, but something stronger, something primal and curious, compelled her to obey. She got up and walked to the kitchen. The linoleum felt cold under her bare feet. "Open the drawer," the voice instructed. Her hand shook as she pulled it open. Inside was a knife. "Pick it up," the voice said. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Pick it up," the voice repeated, firmer this time. "You want to sleep, don't you? You want peace." Tears streamed down her face as she reached for the knife. The weight of it felt unnatural in her hand, like it belonged to someone else. The voice continued, guiding her to the living room, to the window. "Look outside," it said. She drew back the curtain and gasped. Across the street, a man stood in his own window, staring directly at her. He raised a hand and waved. The radio crackled. "He's been watching you, Jenny. He's the reason you can't sleep. You know what to do." She dropped the knife and stumbled back, the room spinning. "No, no, no," she muttered, clutching her head. "This isn't real." The voice laughed, low and menacing. "Oh, it's real, Jenny, and it's just beginning." The next morning, Jenny woke up to sunlight streaming through the window. The knife was back in the drawer. The radio sat silent on her bedside table as if nothing had happened. But when she turned it on, all she heard was static. She tried to go about her day, but the memory of the man in the window haunted her. That night, she waited for the broadcast, but it didn't come. Days turned into weeks, and still the radio remained silent. And then, one night, at 3:13 a.m., the voice returned. "Welcome back, Jenny," it said. "Did you miss me?" This time, she didn't try to resist. The stories had become her reality, and she was their willing participant. The midnight broadcast had claimed her, body and soul. Whispers in the fog. The ocean never stopped moving, not even when the town of Gray Harbor stood still in the embrace of its ever-present fog. Elaine Carter didn't pick Gray Harbor for its postcard charm. She picked it because it was the farthest she could get from the wreckage of her life in Boston. It had been 3 months since the accident, 3 months since the car crash on the icy road, 3 months since she lost her son, Adam. She rented a small, weather-beaten cottage on the edge of the cliffs. The waves crashed relentlessly below, and the fog rolled in so thick some mornings that it felt like the world had been erased. Perfect. Isolation was what she wanted, needed. Elaine spent her days trying to forget. She painted the faded kitchen cabinets white, arranged seashells on the mantel, and forced herself to eat even when her body felt like a hollow shell. Nights, though, were a different story. Nights belonged to the fog. The first whisper came on a Tuesday. Elaine had stepped outside to bring in the laundry. She froze when she heard it. A faint, unmistakable voice carried on the wind. "Mom?" Her heart stopped. It was Adam's voice. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. "Mom, I'm here." Her breath caught in her throat as she scanned the thick fog wrapping around her like a shroud. The voice was distant, faint, but it was him. It was him. "Adam?" she whispered, her voice trembling. No answer. She spent the night staring out the window, the radio playing softly to fill the silence. It had to be her imagination. Grief did strange things to people, didn't it? She'd read about phantom smells, auditory hallucinations. That's all it was. Except the voice came back the next night, louder. "Mom, can you hear me? Please, I'm so cold." Elaine bolted to the door, her heart hammering. "Adam? Where are you?" No response, only the crash of the waves and the wind howling through the fog. The demands begin. Over the next week, the whispers grew more insistent. Each night they came closer, clearer. Adam's voice was no longer a faint echo. It was as though he stood just beyond the edge of the fog, hidden but near. "Why won't you help me, Mom? Come find me, please." She tried to rationalize it. Stress, trauma. Maybe the air currents were carrying voices from somewhere else. But deep down, she didn't believe any of that. By the second week, Adam's voice started giving her instructions. "Bring my red jacket to the shore." It was still in the box she hadn't unpacked, along with his other things she couldn't bear to touch. Her hands trembled as she carried it to the edge of the cliffs. The whispers seemed to surround her now, swirling with the fog. "Throw it into the water." She hesitated, the jacket clutched tightly in her hands. "Do it, Mom. You have to." Her fingers let go, and the red jacket vanished into the crashing waves below. The truth unfolds. The whispers became a nightly ritual. Adam's demands grew stranger, more unsettling. She buried a toy truck in the garden, burned his favorite book in the fireplace, and poured his baseball glove into the sea. Each act seemed to quiet the whispers, but only for a while. Then came the dream. Elaine woke up gasping, her body drenched in sweat. In the dream, Adam had been standing at the edge of the cliff, his small body silhouetted against the gray sky. He wasn't alone. A figure stood behind him, cloaked in fog, its face shrouded. It whispered something into Adam's ear, and her son turned to look at her, his eyes blank and lifeless. "They won't let me go," he'd said. "You have to help me, Mom. You have to come." The final night. Elaine could no longer sleep. Her days blurred into nights, and her mind felt like it was unraveling. She began hearing whispers even in the daylight, faint echoes drifting through the fog. Then one night, Adam's voice came again, more urgent than ever. "You have to come now, Mom. Tonight. Please, I need you." The fog was so dense that she could barely see her hand in front of her face as she made her way to the cliffs. The whispers guided her, pulling her closer to the edge. "Just a little further," Adam said. "I'm waiting for you." She stopped, her bare feet inches from the crumbling edge. The waves roared below, and the fog seemed alive, swirling and writhing around her. "Adam!" she called, her voice breaking. And then she saw him, a small figure standing in the fog, just beyond the edge of the cliff. His face was pale, his eyes wide and glassy. "Mom," he said, reaching out a hand, "come with me, please." Her heart ached with longing. Tears streamed down her face as she took a step closer. But then something shifted. The fog parted for just a moment, and Elaine saw what was standing behind Adam. It wasn't human. It was tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long, its face a twisted, gaping maw. Its hands rested on Adam's shoulders, holding him in place. The boy's lips moved, but it wasn't his voice anymore. "Jump!" it hissed, the voice distorted and inhuman. "Join us!" Elaine stumbled back, the spell broken. She screamed, the sound tearing through the night. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a cacophony in her ears. But she ran. She ran back to the cottage, slamming the door behind her, and didn't stop shaking until the sun rose. The aftermath. Elaine packed her things the next day and left Gray Harbor, never looking back. She didn't know what she had heard or seen, and she didn't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, she still hears whispers. And the fog seems to follow her no matter where she goes.